The air in Mr. Hamilton Jones's office was thick with the scent of stale tea and the faint, lingering aroma of government-issued paper. It was not a fragrance that inspired excitement, much like Mr. Jones's life at the Whitehall Ministry. His days unfolded in a predictable symphony of paperwork, meetings, and more paperwork, occasionally interrupted by a cup of lukewarm tea. But today, there was a disruption in the usual routine, a hint of something extraordinary. A rumor, or rather a series of rumors, had been circulating around the ministry like a particularly stubborn dust bunny, an unsettling presence that could not be overlooked. Ghosts, Jones. Ghosts. The minister, Bartholomew, his face flushed a shade of red that rivaled the ministry's outdated carpeting, practically bellowed the accusation. The ministry is haunted. Mr. Jones, a man who valued order and efficiency above all else, had initially dismissed the rumors as mere products of overworked minds and overheated imaginations. However, the minister, a man who also demanded order and efficiency, determined that such matters could not be left to chance. "Investigate, Jones," he decreed with a finality that allowed no room for argument. "Find out what is happening." And so, Mr. Jones, ever the loyal civil servant, found himself confronted with the daunting task of investigating the supernatural. He had always felt more at ease with spreadsheets and statistics than with spectral apparitions. He was as qualified to investigate ghosts as a penguin would be to fly a Spitfire. His first order of business was to gather evidence. He started with a thorough inventory of the ministry's recent activities. Nothing out of the ordinary, just the usual flurry of reports, regulations, and the occasional bureaucratic hiccup. Then he investigated the rumors, meticulously documenting each whisper and peculiar occurrence. There were reports of flickering lights in the late hours, the sound of unseen footsteps echoing through the hallways, and the occasional chilling whisper that seemed to emanate from the very walls. Whispers, Mr. Jones noted in his meticulous script, from the walls. It was all so improbable, so very non-British. The very idea of ghostly apparitions haunting the hallowed halls of Whitehall was, frankly, ludicrous. He might as well be tasked with investigating reports of unicorns grazing in the royal gardens. But as he continued his investigation, a peculiar tension began to envelop him, creating a sense of the inexplicable. He found himself straining to catch whispers and watching for fleeting shadows. Much to his chagrin, his typically impeccable composure started to falter. "This is absurd," he muttered to himself as he examined the latest report of a ghostly figure spotted in the tea room. "I've never believed in such nonsense." But a tiny voice, one that sounded suspiciously like the whisper he had been trying to ignore, chimed in, "But what if you're wrong?" And with that chilling thought, Mr. Jones resolved to adopt a different approach. He would investigate the whispers not with skepticism, but with a sense of cautious curiosity. He understood that the ministry was a labyrinth of hidden rooms and forgotten corridors, a place where shadows could easily transform into specters, and whispers could become the voices of the dead. He began his investigation in the tea room, the alleged site of the most recent ghostly sighting. He found nothing out of the ordinary, only the faint aroma of Earl Grey and the gentle clatter of teacups. However, as he stood there, his gaze was drawn to a dusty bookcase nestled in the corner. He approached it, his fingers gliding over the ancient wood, a shiver running down his spine. There, nearly obscured by a pile of forgotten reports, he discovered a small, leather-bound journal. He carefully lifted it, a sense of anticipation coursing through him. "This," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "might be quite interesting." He opened the journal, his eyes scanning the faded ink. The first few pages were filled with neat handwriting, documenting the mundane details of daily life, appointments, meetings, and the occasional complaint about the quality of the tea. Then the script changed. The words began to convey a desperate urgency, infused with fear, anxiety, and an almost palpable sense of loss. He continued reading, his heart pounding in his chest. The words on the page were chilling, imbued with a despair that resonated deeply within him. And then, a name emerged, a name that would soon become synonymous with the haunting of Whitehall, Amelia Finch. Mr. Jones experienced a sudden prickle of fear as a cold hand seemed to reach out from the page, grasping at his very soul. He slammed the journal shut, his fingers trembling. But it was too late. The whispers, the ghostly murmurs that had been lurking in the shadows, suddenly intensified, swirling around him like a vortex of unseen energy. He heard the chilling sound of laughter, a noise that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. He spun around, his heart pounding against his ribs, but there was nothing, only the empty, dusty room shrouded in an eerie silence. He glanced down at the journal in his hands, its leather cover now cold and clammy to the touch. His eyes, wide with fear, met the inscription on the cover, "The Truth in the Tea Room." And in that moment, as the silence in the room grew deafening, Mr. Jones realized that his life would never be the same. Mr. Hamilton Jones, a man who favored the comforting predictability of his filing cabinet over the unpredictable whims of the paranormal, found himself standing before a door that appeared to whisper secrets. This door was hidden in plain sight, tucked away behind a towering bookcase in a seemingly forgotten corner of the Whitehall ministry. The door, painted a faded brown, bore no name, no inscription, and no indication of its purpose. It was a door that seemed to hum with a long-forgotten history. He recalled the minister's stern words, "The typing pool. Investigate it, Jones. It's the heart of the haunting." As he reached out to turn the handle, a shiver ran down his spine, not a shiver of fear, but one of anticipation, a frisson of excitement he hadn't felt in years. The door creaked open, revealing a room shrouded in dust and silence. Sunlight filtered through the grimy windows, illuminating a collection of ancient typewriters, their keys frozen in mid-flight like a chorus of silent whispers. A chill settled in the air, not due to the age of the room, but from something else, something unseen. It was as if the very atmosphere held a memory, a lingering echo of another time. He could feel the presence of the ghost of the typing pool in his bones. He scanned the room, his gaze landing on a framed photograph resting on a dusty desk. A group of women, their faces youthful and resolute, stood with their arms around one another. Smiles beamed from beneath their neatly coiffed hair. It was a picture of camaraderie, of shared purpose, a stark contrast to the chilling silence that now hung in the air. A name was scrawled on the back of the photograph in faded ink, Amelia Finch and the girls. The handwriting was elegant, almost poetic, as if the author had poured her heart into every stroke. A wave of sadness washed over him, a recognition of a life lost and a dedication abandoned. He moved around the room, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He discovered a half-written letter tucked away in a drawer, the ink still wet and the words barely legible. It was a desperate plea for employment, a heart-wrenching testament to the fear of joblessness. The name Amelia Finch haunted him, echoing in the eerie silence of the room. He felt an inexplicable sense of empathy for this woman, a woman he had never met, yet whose spirit seemed to permeate every corner of the space. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught his eye. He turned, his breath hitching in his throat as he beheld a faint silhouette, a spectral image of a woman with her back to him, her hands gracefully dancing across the keys of a typewriter. It was Amelia Finch, the ghost of the typing pool, her ethereal form seemingly absorbed in the familiar rhythm of her work. His hand trembled as he reached for his notepad. He needed to document this tangible evidence of the haunting. He scribbled furiously, attempting to capture the fleeting image of the ghostly apparition that seemed to fade as quickly as it had appeared. Bit too theatrical for my taste, don't you think? He turned abruptly to see Penelope Cartwright, his sharp-tongued and ever-reliable colleague, leaning against the doorway with her arms crossed and a smirk playing on her lips. "Penelope," he exclaimed, startled, "I thought you were with the minister." "Oh, you know how it is," she said, her voice laced with dry wit. "A certain minister requires his tea at precisely 3:45 p.m., not a moment later, or else the world will come to an end. He's not exactly known for his flexibility, you see." He chuckled, feeling relieved by her presence. "This isn't funny, Penelope. This is serious." "I'm sure it is," she replied, stepping into the room, her gaze lingering on the spectral image of Amelia Finch. A ghost in a typing pool? Is that what we're dealing with here, Jones? A ghost with a penchant for vintage Underwood machines? Honestly, I thought the ghosts in this ministry had better taste. He ignored her teasing, attempting to regain his composure. It's a spectral image, Penelope. There's no doubt about it. Right, she said, stepping closer to him. Well, if you're seeing ghosts, I suggest you check your blood sugar. Perhaps you've had a little too much sugar in your afternoon tea? He scowled at her and then pointed to the photograph on the desk. Amelia Finch. She's the one. Penelope gazed at the photograph and then back at the ethereal image. Oh, Amelia, she said, a trace of sympathy in her voice. I've heard whispers about her, a devoted spirit who just couldn't seem to catch a break. And now, she's a ghost, Jones said, a sense of dread creeping into his voice. Penelope smiled, a playful glint in her eyes. Or perhaps, she said, she's simply a talented actress waiting for her big break. Maybe she's auditioning for a role in a new play, a spectral drama set in a forgotten typing pool. He stared at Penelope, torn between laughter and screams. She was right, of course. The notion of a ghost with a flair for theatrical dramatics was absurd. Yet, he couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that there was something deeper to this haunting, something darker, something that whispered of a life lost and a spirit yearning for redemption. As he glanced back toward the corner of the room, the spectral image of Amelia Finch had disappeared, leaving only a lingering chill in the air. Penelope, I need to learn more about her, he said in a low whisper. I must know what happened to her. Penelope nodded, a hint of seriousness replacing her usual playful banter. I'll help you, Jones. But for now, we have a minister to appease. Perhaps a bit of tea, a touch of sugar, and a healthy dose of British humour are in order. He sighed, he couldn't argue with that. Penelope reached into her bag and pulled out a silver flask, its contents shimmering in the dim light. My special blend, she said, a bit of courage, a touch of resilience, and a dash of caffeine, just what the doctor ordered. As they exited the typing pool, leaving the ethereal image behind, Jones couldn't shake the feeling that their investigation was only just beginning. The ghost of the typing pool was more than a mere apparition, it served as a haunting reminder of a life lost, a life that had left an indelible mark on the ministry, one that would not be easily erased. The ghost of the typing pool was merely the first chapter in a narrative that was just beginning to unfold, a tale poised to unravel a web of secrets, loss, and redemption. The air was thick with the scent of damp laundry and forgotten memories as Mr. Jones entered the former home of Mrs. Amelia Finch. It was a modest flat, its walls decorated with peeling wallpaper and faded photographs, each one whispering a story of a life once lived. A thin layer of dust covered everything, serving as a tangible reminder of the emptiness that had settled in since Mrs. Finch's departure. He envisioned her bustling about, her hands dancing over a well-worn typewriter, her face illuminated by the warm glow of a lamp as she wrote. Now, the silence was interrupted only by the rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock, its hands frozen in time, much like the life that had once filled this space. He carefully navigated around a stack of old newspapers, each serving as a testament to the world that had moved on while Mrs. Finch remained behind. A faded teacup perched precariously on a rickety table, its remnants of tea suggesting a bygone era of quiet comfort that no longer existed. Good afternoon, sir. You must be Mr. Jones, the investigator. A gentle and warm voice startled him. A woman, her face etched with the wrinkles of time, stood in the doorway, her eyes reflecting a mixture of curiosity and sadness. Yes, Mrs. Higgins, that's correct. I'm here to learn a bit more about Mrs. Finch, if you're willing to share. Of course, dear. Mrs. Finch was a lovely woman, always so kind and helpful. He settled into a worn armchair, its cushions providing a surprisingly comfortable perch. Mrs. Higgins, her step heavy with weariness, took a seat opposite him, her hands clasped in her lap. She was a dedicated worker, that one, Mrs. Higgins began, her voice tinged with admiration. She poured her heart and soul into her job at Whitehall. It wasn't just a job for her, it was a passion, a calling. She believed in what she was doing and in the importance of her work, even if it was just typing reports and letters. Mr. Jones listened intently, his mind piecing together the intricate puzzle of Mrs. Finch's life. "Then what happened?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Higgins's eyes filled with tears. "The ministry. They let her go. They said there wasn't enough work and that they had to downsize." But Amelia was devastated. She felt as though she had been betrayed and abandoned. Mr. Jones's heart ached for the woman he had never met but had come to know through whispers, shadows, and the echoes of her existence. He sensed that Mrs. Finch's spectral appearances were not malicious but rather a desperate cry for recognition, a longing for a life that had been so abruptly snatched away. "Did she talk much about it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Higgins nodded, a single tear rolling down her cheek. She spent hours sitting by the window, gazing out at the street, lost in thought. She often spoke about the work she used to do and the people she once knew. She missed it terribly, missed being part of something, missed the sense of purpose it provided her. It must have been a challenging time for her. Indeed, Mr. Jones. It shattered her spirit. She became withdrawn and isolated, as if the very essence of life had been drained from her. Mr. Jones listened, his own sense of isolation resonating in the stillness of the flat. He had always viewed himself as a solitary being, satisfied within the organized realm of his ministry. Yet, here, among the remnants of Mrs. Finch's life, he experienced a pang of empathy, a connection that transcended the boundaries of life and death. He rose from his chair, his legs feeling unusually heavy. "Thank you, Mrs. Higgins," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "This has been invaluable." As he approached the door, a sudden gust of wind swept through the window, sending a flurry of papers and a faint, ethereal scent of lavender swirling around the room. "I believe I have a better understanding of Mrs. Finch now," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think I understand why she's here." He turned to leave, but as he did, he noticed a faint flicker in the corner of his eye. It was a fleeting image, a spectral figure of a woman dressed in a faded grey coat, her face obscured by shadows. She looked up, her eyes meeting his for a brief moment before vanishing into the darkness. He stood in the doorway, his heart pounding, the unsettling sensation of being watched clinging to him like a shroud. The echo of a life lost. The ghostly whisper of a woman who, even in death, continued to search for something, a sense of belonging, a reason to exist. And the question hung in the air, heavy and foreboding. What was she looking for? The air in the tea room was heavy with the scent of stale biscuits and unfulfilled dreams. It was a refuge for weary civil servants seeking comfort in a cup of lukewarm tea and the hushed gossip of their colleagues. However, today, the room exuded a different kind of intrigue. Mr. Hamilton Jones, his spectacles precariously balanced on his nose, stood amidst a flurry of discarded teacups and crumpled papers, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. "It's like stepping back in time," Miss Penelope Cartwright remarked, her voice tinged with a touch of morbid fascination. She had a talent for uncovering the macabre in even the most ordinary of circumstances. "Indeed," Mr. Jones agreed, his tone lacking any excitement. "It's almost as if the room itself is holding its breath, waiting for something to happen." They discovered the diary hidden in a forgotten corner, beneath a stack of dusty files labeled Secretarial Procedures. The leather cover was worn, the pages yellowed with age, and the faded ink hinted at a life lived long ago. It served as a testament to Mrs. Amelia Finch, the elusive ghost they were pursuing. As they pored over the diary, the story unfolded before their eyes. The meticulous script revealed a woman fiercely devoted to her work, her words a symphony of commas and semicolons, a testament to her dedication to proper grammar. It was clear that her job at Whitehall had been more than just a paycheck, it had been her purpose and her identity. "She speaks of her work with such passion," Miss Cartwright remarked, her voice a hushed whisper. "It's almost romantic." Mr. Jones let out a soft chuckle. "The romance of the typing pool, Penelope. Don't you find it a bit excessive?" But even Mr. Jones could not deny the powerful emotions that seeped through the pages. The diary chronicled a gradual descent into despair, the burden of unemployment, and the overwhelming fear of being forgotten. It was a heartbreaking narrative of a woman striving to maintain the last remnants of her self-worth. "There's something else in here," Miss Cartwright pointed out, her finger tracing a faint, almost imperceptible stain on one of the pages. Like a smudge, perhaps a fingerprint. Mr. Jones leaned closer, peering at the stain through his thick spectacles. "That's curious. It appears to be an image of some sort." With a careful hand, he gently brushed away the dust, revealing a faint outline of a projector. It is a diagram," he said, his voice barely above a murmur. "A projector connected to a screen. It seems to be installed in the tea room." Miss Cartwright gasped. "The projector? The one that has been causing the spectral images? It's all been a trick." "Indeed," Mr. Jones agreed, a faint smile playing on his lips. "But why?" He surveyed the room, where the scent of stale biscuits and forgotten dreams clung to the air with an unsettling intensity. His gaze fell upon a small wooden cabinet nestled in the corner. It was locked, a brass keyhole staring back at him like a vigilant eye. "Penelope, go fetch Minister Bartholomew," Mr. Jones said, his voice suddenly firm. "I believe we have just uncovered the truth." But as Miss Cartwright rushed out of the room, the lock on the cabinet clicked open, revealing a hidden compartment. A faint, almost imperceptible shimmer danced within, beckoning him to come closer. "It's a projector, all right," Mr. Jones whispered, reaching for the object. However, as his fingers brushed against the cold metal, a chilling wave of energy surged through him. A ghostly image of Amelia Finch, her face etched with sadness and desperation, materialized before him, her eyes locked onto his. "Help me," her voice, a mere whisper, sent shivers down his spine. "Help me find my way back." He looked up just as the door creaked open, revealing the astonished face of Minister Bartholomew. "Mr. Jones," Bartholomew exclaimed. "What on earth?" His voice trailed off as his eyes fell upon the spectral image of Amelia Finch, her ethereal form shimmering in the dimly lit room. For a moment, the air was thick with unspoken questions and a burgeoning sense of dread. This was not merely a case of ghosts, it was something far more sinister, something that threatened to unravel the very fabric of their reality. "Minister," Mr. Jones began, his voice trembling, "I believe we have much to discuss." As the minister stepped into the room, the ghost of Amelia Finch flickered, her image fading into the shadows and leaving behind only a chilling silence. The truth, like a phantom, remained elusive, waiting to be unearthed in the dark corners of Whitehall. The air in the minister's office felt heavy with unspoken words. It was the kind of tension that enveloped the room like a particularly stubborn layer of dust, one that resisted even the most diligent efforts to sweep it away. Mr. Jones, ever the stickler for formality, cleared his throat, an action that shattered the silence like an overripe plum. "Minister," he began, his voice a low rumble that only the presence of Miss Cartwright, perched on the edge of a velvet armchair, could rival. "We have discovered the source of the disturbances. The spectral apparitions, the strange sounds, it's all connected to a simple machine." He gestured toward the ornate grandfather clock that stood in the corner of the room. The old clock houses a projector, a rather ingenious contraption that Mrs. Finch used to play her own ghost show. Minister Bartholomew, his expression a mask of stoicism, merely raised an eyebrow. "A ghost show? Is this some sort of elaborate prank, Jones?" His tone carried a hint of disapproval, the kind that could make a teapot whistle with indignation. "No, Minister, I assure you it's not. We discovered Mrs. Finch's diary, which is quite revealing, I must say. It appears she was very dedicated to her job, and after her unfortunate dismissal, she felt adrift. She was consumed by her fear of losing her livelihood." Miss Cartwright, ever the keen observer, chimed in, her voice as crisp as a freshly ironed shirt. "The diary details how she spent weeks in the typing pool, searching for a way to return. She even began using the projector to create these ghosts in the hopes that someone would take notice. She felt invisible." The minister, his stern expression softening for a moment, appeared to contemplate this. "Invisible? Are you suggesting she craved attention? That she was looking for a reason to be remembered? Mr. Jones nodded, his gaze fixed on the minister. Precisely, Minister. She was trying to make herself known, to remind the world of her existence. A rather dramatic way to do it, wouldn't you agree, Jones? The minister remarked, his voice betraying a hint of amusement. Indeed, Minister. However, beneath the theatrics may lie a desperate plea for recognition, as well as a reminder that even the most ordinary lives can leave an indelible mark on the world. The minister remained silent for a moment, his eyes darting between Mr. Jones and Miss Cartwright. Finally, he sighed, a weary expression etched across his face. I must admit, I was rather dismissive of these ghostly tales. However, I now see that there is a human story behind it all, a narrative of loss, fear, and desperation. It is a story I failed to recognize. It's not too late, Minister, Mr. Jones said, his voice steady. We can help Mrs. Finch. She needs to know that she is not forgotten. How? The minister's question hung in the air, imbued with a newfound sense of responsibility. Mr. Jones smiled, a faint flicker of hope illuminating his typically stoic expression. That, Minister, is where we come in. We have a plan. The minister leaned forward, intrigued. A plan? He inquired. Indeed. However, I believe we first need to visit Mrs. Finch's flat. I think we may have something she requires. Mr. Jones's smile widened. He added, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, small package of encouragement might help her find her way back to the light. As Mr. Jones spoke, the clock in the corner chimed, its melodic tones resembling a mournful sigh. However, the minister's eyes held a spark of curiosity, a flicker of something that resembled hope. But as they stepped out of the minister's office, the clock chimed once more, its discordant clang echoing a different kind of message. A message that lingered in the air, a whisper on the wind, beware. The ghosts of Whitehall are not always what they appear to be. The air was thick with the scent of aged paper and a subtle hint of dust. Mr. Hamilton Jones, his usually impeccable attire slightly disheveled from the day's events, stood at the entrance of Mrs. Amelia Finch's modest flat. He held a plain brown package in his hands, containing a thoughtfully curated collection of hope and encouragement. The minister, a man of immense power and even greater formality, had been surprisingly helpful in this endeavor. He had noticed the flicker of genuine remorse in Mr. Jones's eyes, a rare sight in the typically emotionless civil servant, and agreed to provide a small stipend for Mrs. Finch's retraining and living expenses. The minister was clearly a pragmatist, one who recognized a beneficial public relations opportunity when he saw it. After all, a ghost-free Whitehall would significantly enhance the ministry's reputation. The ministry had always been a realm of order and routine, characterized by memos and filing systems, and marked by endless cups of lukewarm tea consumed in the sterile atmosphere of the canteen. In a way, Mrs. Finch, in her spectral form, had embodied that sense of monotonous order. However, as Mr. Jones stood at the threshold of her flat, he sensed a shift in the air. Something had changed. It was as if the ghosts of the ministry, much like the specters of our own past, were no longer mere phantoms but real, living, breathing individuals. He took a deep breath and stepped inside. The flat was small and sparsely furnished, resonating with the echoes of a life once lived. A single ray of sunlight sliced through the dust motes, illuminating a faded photograph of Mrs. Finch, her youthful face brimming with a confidence that had long since diminished. Mr. Jones placed the package on the table, a small gesture of support in a world that seemed to have forgotten Mrs. Finch. He paused, uncertain of what to do next. The apartment felt oddly empty, the silence almost deafening. Just as he was about to turn away, however, he heard a soft sound, a sigh, a whisper. "Thank you," the voice whispered, so soft that it was barely audible, like the rustling of leaves in a gentle breeze. "Thank you for remembering." Mr. Jones felt a shiver run down his spine, a prickle of goosebumps forming on his arms. He turned slowly, his eyes scanning the room, searching for the source of the sound. But there was nothing there. Just the echo of a voice, the ghost of a memory, the faint scent of lavender, and the image of a woman finally finding her peace. He felt a sudden urge to leave and escape the eerie stillness of the flat. However, as he reached the doorknob, something caught his eye. A small, handwritten note, pinned to the wall beside the photograph, a single sentence scrawled in a neat, precise hand: "The typing pool waits." Mr. Jones stared at the note, a chill creeping down his spine. His eyes darted to the photograph. The image of Mrs. Finch seemingly flickered with a faint, ethereal glow. He felt a cold dread that had settled in his stomach. The case was closed and the truth was revealed. But something he knew was not quite right. He turned and walked out of the flat, the words of the note echoing in his head: "The typing pool waits." The door closed softly behind him, the silence of the flat amplified, and now tinged with a sense of foreboding. He could not shake the feeling that something was still amiss, that there was more to the story, and more to be revealed. Something that could only be found in the shadows, in the unseen corners of Whitehall, in the hidden depths of the typing pool, a place where ghosts whispered and secrets lingered. Mr. Jones walked down the hallway, the note clutched tightly in his hand, and his mind raced. What did the note mean? Why was the typing pool waiting? Most importantly, what was Mrs. Finch's hiding? What was the true nature of the haunting? As he reached the end of the hallway, he saw the minister, and his face was etched with a mixture of concern and relief. He was standing on the doorway of his office, and his gaze was fixed on the closed door of Mrs. Finch's flat. "Jones," he said, his voice strained, "I've been expecting you. There's something you need to see." He gestured towards the door. "The typing pool, it seems, has something else to tell us." Jones felt that the tremor ran through his body. He looked at the note in his hand and then back to the minister. He knew, with certainty, that chilled him to the bone, and that this was only the beginning of a new chapter in this strange and unsettling tale. The story is far from complete. "Lead the way, minister," he said, his voice a mere whisper. "I'm ready to listen."